بلومبرج طالع على الهواء، وانا الصوره اللي اعطيتني هلا وصلت شوي. بس عم معي كاميرا ثالثه اذا شيء، اذا بدك تبعت تسجل ماشي؟ معي كاميرا ثالثه اذا بدك تبعت تسجل، اذا فايدة تكون صعبه على الانسان. سرور وين؟ اجين عم ياخذوا راح. هونيك انا هيدي تاعت المي طفيه. الله يستر اللي عم بيطفوها كيف.
وين صرتي؟ بعدك بحي الأرمن؟
فادي يعني أنا نعم حي أرمينيا فادي.
أرمينيا عفوا.
لا ما رح نسوي بس سوي عم بيتم إنعاش في هذه الأثناء. يتم إنعاش إحدى السيدات التي يبدو أن حالتها حرجة. يتم إنعاش إحدى السيدات بس بإجر بس صور من تحت بليز ما تصور وجوه. يتم إنعاشها. يبدو أن أحد الأطباء يعمد إلى إنعاشه يعني حالتها خطرة جدا. فادي آسف هذه المعلومة، ولكن قال لنا أحد شهود العيان أن هناك عدد من الجثث الموضوعة في طابق أحد طوابق المباني هنا، لأنه تم انتشالها ولكن سيارات الإسعاف لم تصل بعد إلى المكان. هناك مناشدات على أمل أنه هالسيدة ترجع تعود إلى الحياة. أيضا هناك يعني ترجع تقدر أقصد أن يبدو أنه هناك عدد من الجرحى يتم الآن إسعافهم. عدد من المواطنين يسعفون بعضهم البعض. الآن يتم انتشال الامرأة و
في هناك كمان نداء
إسعافها الآن ونقلها بسيارة مدنية.
أنا يعني عم حاول فوت توجه هذه النداءات. حتى محافظ بيروت يقول سكاي نيوز فقدنا فريق إطفاء ولا ندري أين العناصر. ناس تتحدث عن 5 عناصر. إن شاء الله تكون هذه المعطيات خاطئة، لكن يقولون أن هناك فريق من الإطفاء أن لقد انقطع الاتصال معهم. أنتقل إلى رالف دوميت من مستشفى الروم. رالف تفضل. كمان مستشفى الروم تلقت ضررا كبيرا.
نداء عاجل من مستشفى الروم. نداء عاجل من مستشفى الروم من إدارة مستشفى الروم بنقل المرضى سريعا والإغاثة السريعة، لأنه هناك مرضى في كلورات المستشفى وأيضا في غرف عناية الفائقة بحاجة للإغاثة السريعة. إلى جانب دكتور عيد عزار. دكتور شو الوضع بقلب المستشفى؟ وصلتنا معلومات انه في اليوم ضحايا عندكم بالمستشفى.
في اول شيء بطلت المستشفى، كل الطوابق مكسره، عملنا ايفاكويشن لاكثريه المرضى. بعد في مرضى العنايه فوق، في مرضى القلب بالعنايه بعدهم على الاكسجين، وبعدهم بدهم ينقلوا باسرع وقت، بدهم ينقلوا باسرع وقت لبرا. بقى بنطلب بشكل هلا بدنا الجيش، بدنا حدا.
في صوت تصرف غاز، في عندكم اي خطر؟
يا اخي في خطر كبير اكيد. حدا صرنا طلبنا الجيش، طلبنا الدنيا كلها ما حدا اجى. اتس كاتاستروفي. وي نيد بيبل هلا يكونوا.
يعني بدي اعتذر على الصور اللي رح ننقلها حاليا فادي، لكن فعلا على ارض الطوارئ هنا الطاقم الطبي يعمل جاهدا لاسعاف كل المرضى على الطرقات خارج الجميع يناشد هنا سيارات لكي تحمل وتساعد في نقل المصابين. الى جانبنا كمان عدد من الضحايا الذين استشهدوا نتيجه هذا الحرب الذي حصل.
طبيب مدقق. بدنا فرق إغاثة من هلا لساعة زمان، نص ساعة زمان ماكسيموم. في الكلورات كلها بتتفضى. بعد في مرضى فوق بالعناية ما قدرنا شلناهم، والكلورات ما بينفات عليهم وما في كهرباء. بدنا الجيش هلا، مش بعد 5 دقائق، هلا. ما بعرف مع مين عم نحكي، بدنا اياهم هلا تدري.
دكتور كم يبلغ اليوم عدد الاشخاص اللي صار توصل؟
يا اخي وحياة مش ها مرضانا، ها ما حدا شال عنا. نحن ها كل
الاشخاص اللي عم تيجي لعندكم شو
ناخذهم كلهم نروح على غير محل. وي ار اون كاتاستروفي. بدنا حدا يفضي الطوابق. خايف انا من فلتين غاز، مي، حريق. بدنا الجيش، بدنا فرق اسعاف من هلا دغري مش بعد 5 دقائق. اللي عم يسمع يبعثهم هلا.
نعم بالفعل، يعني الخطر هنا من الإدارة من أي تسرب أي يحصل للغاز أو أي حريق قد يندلع هنا في المستشفى. العمليات لا تحصل حاليا فادية لإغاثة المرضى، بحيث المستشفى تدمرت بشكل كارثي. هنا حالات الإسعاف يعني والإغاثة تحصل للمرضى الذين كانوا في المستشفى، وكل من يعني يطلب الدخول إلى المستشفى ما من أحد يستطيع أن يلبي طلب الجرح الذين يتوجهون إلى هنا. الطرقات يعني بمحيط مستشفى الروم أيضا بحال كارثية، أيضا لا يمكن الوصول إلا مشيا على الأقدام، وهناك نداءات لكل شخص معه موتو أو سيارة أو أي آلية ممكن تنقل المرضى من هنا إلى أن تتوجه، يعني خاصة الموتويات. فهذه نداء إلى كل شخص يملك دراجة نارية قادر يجي فيها ويساعد بنقل المرضى. جميع المصابين يلي عم بيكونوا واقفين امام المستشفى طالبين اشخاص تنقلهم، وبالتالي هذا نداء ايضا نوجهه الى كل شخص قادر انه يوصل ويساهم بنقل المرضى. بما يتعلق بوضع المستشفيات في بيروت، يعني الحال نفسها بمستشفى الجعيتاوي، ايضا بمستشفى الجامعه الامريكي كذلك الامر، مستشفى كليمونسو، كل المستشفيات تشهد ضغط كبير. يعني ايضا حتى مستشفيات جوني والمتن الصليب الاحمر يعمل. بالاول كان نزل حوالي 30 فرقه الصليب الاحمر من المسعفين لانها تعمل وتشتغل على الارض، ويقال انه الاشخاص رح ايضا الصليب الاحمر رح يعزز اكثر من عدد الفرق اللي هي على الارض. وكما كنا ايضا استمعنا فادي الى الطلبات والنداءات بطلب الدم، التبرع بالدم بكل المستشفيات، لان هناك فعلا نقص وحدات الدم في المستشفى. نحن هون هذا هو مدخل طوارئ الروم مباشرة حاليا. الزميل فادي سكيف ينقل لنا الصورة وهي فعلا كارثية بالداخل. هذا هو هذه هي طوارئ مستشفى الروم. يعني الصور تتحدث عن نفسها. هنا ايضا كان في قسم لمرضى كورونا ايضا يتعالجون هنا في المستشفى، والجميع يعني يناشدنا فادي ايصال الصوت والصرخة سريعا والمساعدة، في حين إدارة المستشفى تطلب من جميع المرضى بعدم التوجه إلى المستشفى لأنه وصل إلى قدرته الاستيعابية القصوى. والجميع بات بحال يعني كارثية هنا بالفعل. الزميل فادي سكيف ينقل لكم مباشرة الصور من داخل مستشفى الروم من الطوارئ. هذه هي الطوارئ، لا إمكانية لمعالجة المرضى داخل الطوارئ. فادي كل ما يحصل من عمليات علاج تحصل بالخارج. بدنا نشير إلى أنه داخل هذه هي المستشفى، يعني بالداخل من جوا هناك مرضى حاليا داخل المستشفى يقبعون في المستشفى. هناك خطر على غرف العناية الفائقة. طلبت إدارة مستشفى الروم من الجيش أن يساند الفرق هنا ومساعدة الطاقم الطبي على إغاثة المستشفى وإخراج من في المستشفى من مرضى من هنا، خاصة مرضى غرف العناية الفائقة وهم كبار في العمر. وللأسف هذه كنا شهدنا يعني عدد من ضحايا هذا التفجير يقبعون على الطرقات في الخارج بعد عمليات إنعاش مستمرة هنا في المستشفى في أكثر من نقطة ومحل، وتستمر يعني عمليات الإسعاف بشكل متواصل في كل قسم. ويعني الجزء الأضرب الذي حصل هنا في هذا المستشفى هو تأثر المستشفى بالتفجير أو بالحادث الأمني الذي حصل، وبالتالي تضرر المستشفى نفسه بالكثير من الأضرار. فادي بس لأنه يعني هناك حال من الضياع في المستشفى بطبيعة الحال. كثير من أهالي من دخل المستشفى يسأل يعني عن من له في المستشفى. هناك مناشدات كثيرة من الخارج وأيضا فادي بعض المواطنين يعني يناشدوننا أن نساعدهم في التواصل مع من يحبون، مع أقاربهم وغيرهم من الأشخاص. يعني هيك صارت المستشفى حاليا هنا، وبالتالي كثير صعب انه تحصل عمليات الإغاثة والمساعدة داخل هذا المستشفى. الصورة نفسها في أكثر من مستشفى في بيروت، كما كنا تواصلنا مع أكثر من قسم. مستشفى الجعيتاوي والذي لا يبعد كثيرا عن مستشفى الروم كذلك الأمر. يعني هناك ضغط كبير من المرضى الذين يدخلون إلى المستشفى الأمريكي كما ذكرنا، أيضا مركز كليمونسو، مستشفيات جولي، كل المستشفيات. وهناك نداء بالتبرع للدم بالمراكز، يعني مش بالمستشفيات ابدا انما في المراكز القادره على استقبال المتبرعين في الدم. يعني يتم اخلاء المرضى من المستشفى، قسم الاطفال، العنايه الفائقه، كبار السن. للاسف هناك ضحايا نشاهدهم بالعين المجرده يعني استشهدوا وهم حاليا على الطرقات بانتظار يعني من ينقل هذه الجثث وأيضا هناك نداء من الإدارة، أكرر النداء من الجيش التوجه إلى هنا، المساعدة في الإسعاف، وأيضا إخلاء المستشفى.
وهناك مناشدة أيضا من مستشفى مار يوسف في الدورة، تناشد أيضا سيارات الصليب الأحمر والدفاع المدني وكل الجرحى بعدم إيصال أو نقل هؤلاء الجرحى إلى هذه المستشفى دون التوجه إلى المستشفيات البعيدة، لأن هذه المستشفى أيضا لا تستوعب استقبال أي من الجرحى. تظاهرات الجيش اللبناني تساهم بإخماد الحريق الذي انفجر في مرفأ بيروت. القيادة الوسطى في القوات الأمريكية تتحدث عن خشية من ارتفاع عدد القتلى والضحايا نتيجة هذا الانفجار الذي انفجر داخل مرفأ بيروت. مدير عام الجمارك بدر ظاهر يقول إن عنبر الكيماويات قد انفجر في مرفأ بيروت، ودائما بحسب مدير عام الجمارك بدر ظاهر الذي يعتبر أو يؤكد أن عنبر الكيماويات انفجر في مرفأ بيروت، وهذا قد يفسر فداحة الانفجار وقوة الانفجار وفداحة الأضرار التي خلفها هذا الانفجار في كافة المناطق في بيروت، وأوقع هذا العدد الكبير من الضحايا من قتلى وجرحى. مناشدة من المستشفيات الرجاء عدم نقل الجرحى إلى المستشفيات البيروتية. هناك أضرار كبيرة في بعض المستشفيات. مستشفى الروم تناشد قيادة الجيش وسيارات الإسعاف بنقل الجرحى والمصابين والمرضى من داخل المستشفى إلى غيرها من المستشفيات، لأن الأضرار التي لحقت بمستشفى الروم هي أضرار كبيرة وفادحة. الرجاء نقل الجرحى إلى خارج منطقة بيروت، إلى خارج مدينة بيروت، عند المستشفيات خارج هذه المنطقة تستطيع استيعاب هذا العدد الكبير من المصابين.
These are line of victims looking at now whether this was an industrial explosion, always a possibility until confirmed otherwise, or an act of terror and a deliberate attempt to kill and maim. It has been pointed out that this week is the week in which an international tribunal returns a verdict.
Não deixa de ser uma linha de investigação. A outra, que essa explosão possa ter sido proposital, mas nenhum grupo ainda assumiu. Nenhum líder mundial até o momento também se manifestou, mas acredito que é questão de tempo, porque a tragédia é enorme, as imagens são realmente impressionantes e o número de vítimas dessa explosão certamente será altíssimo.
É de se causar estranheza um depósito com potencial destrutivo tão grande como esse em uma área urbana. Eu recebi essa notícia com muita estranheza, de que havia um depósito com uma quantidade tão grande de explosivos em uma área extremamente habitada. E veja aqui, Ana e ouvinte, que os focos de incêndio continuam. Logo depois da explosão, as imagens são ao vivo, as imagens que temos aqui nos vários retornos, aqui no nosso estúdio da Rádio Bandeirantes, mostram pelo menos uns 10 focos de incêndio. Muita fumaça ainda, muitas viaturas se deslocando por vários pontos, mesmo porque o principal objetivo ou desafio daqui para frente é resgatar essas vítimas todas, tentar encontrar alguém com vida, tentar encontrar as possíveis vítimas soterradas com vida também, Ana.
A agência Reuters dando agora informação de pelo menos 10 mortes, Joel. É isso que a gente tem de informação até agora dessas explosões. Pelo menos 10 mortes que já foram confirmadas pelas autoridades do país.
Eu acredito que esse número deva subir muito, pela imagem que estamos vendo aqui, pela sequência de imagens que já colocamos, que eu estou vendo nos retornos todos. Eu não consigo acreditar em um número abaixo de 100 mortos. Infelizmente, uma região muito grande que foi atingida. A gente espera que eu esteja errado nesse ponto que estou colocando aqui, mas a imagem, ela é de impressionar. É impressionante essa explosão que aconteceu em Beirut, capital do Líbano. O Killing, qualquer novidade, por favor, nos avise, tá?
Combinado, Joel. Vou continuar monitorando a situação e posso entrar aqui ao longo da programação da Rádio Bandeirantes.
Obrigada.
Valeu, um grande abraço. Olha, seguindo agora com o Ian Boechat, um jornalista, um grande jornalista, correspondente internacional, conhece tudo de várias partes do mundo, é um cara viajado, está aqui ao meu lado e é importante a gente contar nesse momento aqui.
It is the wave, the blast wave has turned cars upside.
Uou!
Wir sind heute hier, weil auf der ganzen Welt nur noch wenige Wissenschaftler, die regierungstreu berichten, gehört werden. Es gibt Tausende, Abertausende Wissenschaftler, Ärzte weltweit, die werden nicht gehört, die werden mundtot gemacht, die werden zensiert oder als Verschwörungstheoretiker diskreditiert, obwohl sie ganze Universitäten geleitet haben. Dagegen protestiere ich. Ich möchte den Konsens, der früher möglich war und jetzt nicht mehr erlaubt zu sein.
Unsere Forderung ist zurück zur Demokratie, weg mit den Gesetzen, die uns einengen, weg mit der Maske, die uns zu Sklaven macht.
Im Augenblick sieht es so aus, als ob die gesamte Politik eine Politik der Virologie sei. Ja? Es gibt aber viel mehr als nur erst nur diese eine Seite, ja. Es gibt die gesellschaftlichen Auswirkungen, es gibt auch die medizinischen Auswirkungen und psychischen Auswirkungen der Maßnahmen. Ja, all das muss gegeneinander abgewogen werden und ich habe im Augenblick nicht mehr den Eindruck, dass diese Dinge noch irgendwo verhältnismäßig sind und gegeneinander abgewogen werden.
Well, here in Berlin, a big protest on Saturday against pandemic restrictions has ignited a debate about the limits that can be placed on the right to public assembly. The German Minister for Justice has affirmed that right, while at the same time insisting that rules like wearing masks must be observed. Now, most of the 20,000 people taking part in the protest did not follow guidelines, which led to a number of arrests.
Saturday's protest in Berlin against the rules to fight the coronavirus. Demonstrators failed to keep their distance from each other, and they didn't wear masks either. Politicians are outraged. On the one hand, they're exercising their right to protest, but there are rules which they disregard. Their behavior is playing with people's lives. Freedom and responsibility go hand in hand. There's the freedom to exercise one's right to demonstrate, but also a responsibility to abide by the rules. Instead of a relaxation of the restrictions, the Bavarian state premier, Markus Söder, would rather see a tougher enforcement by authorities to fight the virus. People who come from risk areas and don't take a coronavirus test or refuse to take one, along with those who deliberately violate the measures, must face a fine. Otherwise, all of this makes little sense. As infections rise in Germany, the best way to deal with the pandemic looks set to cause further debate.
That debate very much in the headlines this morning. I'm joined now by our political correspondent, Manuel Shays. Good morning, Manuel. Observers were very surprised, taken back by the size of this demonstration and about who was there.
Well, in fact, people came from all over the country to that protest on Saturday. 20,000 people, you stated. There's a mix of reasons for them to be there. You could find anti-vaxxers who really worry about possible obligatory vaccine once and if a vaccine is found. You also had conspiracy theorists, you had representatives of the far-right movement and of the neo-Nazi movement as well, but you also had people, everyday people who worried that their fundamental rights were being trampled on because of the measures being taken to try and tackle the pandemic. Now, you also had signs that likened wearing a mask to wearing a yellow star during World War II, or for example, there was a banner showing, calling that the tag Der Freiheit, which means the day of freedom, except that this name is actually the name of a Nazi propaganda film by Leni Riefenstahl. So those signs were problematic as well. People were calling for Angela Merkel, the Chancellor, for Christian Drosten, who's the main virologist and the one who became quite famous during that pandemic, for Jens Spahn to be locked up. So we see a sea of angry people who demonstrated on Saturday in Berlin.
Okay, the politicians were very quick to respond to this, especially considering the size of the demonstration. What were they saying?
Well, Jens Spahn, for example, the health minister, say that of course people have a right to protest, that's not put in question. However, if they do so without respecting social distancing, without wearing masks, then they endanger other people. I've covered, for example, the Black Lives Matter all throughout June here in Berlin, and there was also the question of how safe it was. But for example, when there was the biggest protest, which gathered 15,000 people, everybody was wearing masks. So we really see two sides of German society that are clashing at the moment.
Okay, not only clashing, this one part of German society clearly rejecting guidelines that they've been following since March.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's somehow a lack of trust for one part of the German society towards the government and its handling of the crisis. There's also signs of impatience, and perhaps it's more difficult to understand here in Germany because the country hasn't been hit so hard by the pandemic, not as hard as Spain, not as hard as France or Italy, for example. And all things considered, here in Germany we had a very mild lockdown. We're still able to go out, we're still able to do a lot of things that other countries couldn't, yet a lot of people feel that their fundamental freedoms are being threatened.
Okay, not as severe as a lot of places in Spain and France, the lockdowns here. Schools reopening today in the German state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, other schools and other states to follow. What are the guidelines for school reopenings?
Well, today in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, there's 150,000 children which will go back to school. The plan is to make it as normal as possible given the circumstances. They will have 4 to 5 teaching hours per day, including music classes, sports classes as well. Wearing a mask won't be compulsory, but children will be asked to respect social distancing and, when not possible, not to touch each other in any case. And also school years will be divided so as to allow for one class or one school year to be quarantined if there's an infection, but so as not to affect the whole school.
Okay, so localizing also any possible lockdowns. Looking forward. Emmanuel, thanks so much for coming in on this today.
Now in China, the government is not only cracking down on Muslims, but on other religions as well as it pushes to assert communist ideology. Buddhist temples have been closed or demolished, while a campaign has been launched to destroy hundreds of statues of Buddha. The destruction of the giant Guanyin Buddha has drawn international condemnation, as we hear now from correspondent Matthias Berliner.
Liu Ming is a devout Buddhist. Liu is not his real name. He's afraid of repercussion. In his hometown of Xi'an, Buddhists have come under pressure from the government since they started protesting against the destruction of the Buddhist site on the outskirts of the city. The three-faced statue of Guanyin, deity of mercy in Chinese Buddhism, is being demolished.
Suddenly, the government fenced the statue off. They are doing works inside, but they have not told anyone about the reasons for the destruction. It's left us Buddhists and those who worship the goddess Guanyin inside and outside China quite bewildered.
The three-faced Guanyin and an adjacent monastery were built in 2002. The company donated the giant statue to the Buddhist community. Made of white jade, it quickly became famous. I am trying to get a look at the site. The statue is located in a mountainous region about an hour's drive from the city center. The decision to build the statue here in these mountains was not a coincidence. Buddhism has a long history. This area is something like the cradle of Chinese Buddhism. Many of the Buddhist classics were first translated from Sanskrit into Chinese in monasteries located in this area. As we approach the statue, we see security guards posted at the roadside. Stopping and taking pictures of the demolition is strictly prohibited. The government does not want these images to spread on social media. You can only film out of the car window. It is unclear how far the demolition has already gone. Activists have written to the government and campaigned on social media to save the statue. Buddhist associations as far away as Malaysia have protested against its demolition, but to no avail. Xi'an is an ancient capital of China. Tourists from all over the world come to see its historic sites, including its Buddhist heritage. In recent years, the government has pushed for a revival of communist ideology. Even inside Dazian Temple, the world-famous Buddhist heritage site, the sign reminds visitors to uphold socialist values.
It's not only Buddhism, but also Christianity and Islam. The Chinese government is putting immense pressure on religions. Buddhism is treated more leniently because the government considers it to be more in line with their norms. But I've witnessed myself the pressure they're putting on Buddhist temples, and that activity is increasing.
Temples have been forced to cancel religious events. Monasteries have had some of their buildings demolished. Experts estimate that the three-faced Buddha is just one of 800 statues that have been destroyed in recent years.
That story from correspondent Matthias Böllinger. He joins us from Beijing now for more on this story. Hi, Matthias. Why are we seeing this push now to destroy these Buddhist symbols?
We've seen a push for communist ideology, for the ideology of the Communist Party in the past few years. We've seen a hardening of the ideological line within the party and a greater push for their ideology in public discourse. So religion is always, of course, something that is in competition with this ideology that is atheist, and the Communist Party member must promise to be an atheist, cannot be member of any religious organization, in theory at least. And so what we've seen recently is that displays of spirituality, of religion, especially recently, like these 800 Buddha statues, recently erected statues are being torn down, are being demolished to make religion less visible in the country.
Other religions as well, Matthias, right? I mean, there's also pressure on the country's Muslims and Christian minorities, aren't there?
Yes, there is, and the pressure on them is a lot higher, especially in the western region of Xinjiang, where there are distinct Muslim minorities, the Uyghurs and the Kazakhs. Pressure on them is very high. Praying can get you into an internment camp there. But there's also pressure on other Muslim groups that are not in the focus of the authorities because of their ethnicity, but on their display of religion. For example, mosques have been destroyed or have been remodeled. If they were built in an Oriental style, in a Middle Eastern style, they had to tear down some of these features and replace them with Chinese features, and churches had their crosses removed. There has been pressure on Christian communities, also on newly established Christian communities, mostly Protestant communities, where pastors have been arrested, but also on the traditional Christian communities that are found in some of the locations in the countryside. The Communist Party is pushing forward with its ideology, and it's pushing back any value system that might compete with them. And these religions, especially Christianity and Islam, that are seen as foreign religions, are under huge pressure.
What do you think the Chinese government is hoping to gain from repressing this religious freedom?
Power over discourse in the community, power over what people think, what people at least are allowed to publicly think. being a Buddhist will not get you to jail, but they do not want this Buddhist faith displayed as they would have allowed it 20 years ago.
Okay, correspondent Matthias Benninger reporting there from Beijing. Thank you so much.
To Spain now, where former King Juan Carlos is reported to have abruptly left the country. His departure comes amidst a scandal over alleged illegal payments linked to a rail project in Saudi Arabia. In a letter to his son, King Felipe, the former monarch said he was leaving Spain so Felipe could work unhindered by the charges against his father.
The news has rocked Spain. Juan Carlos, the former Spanish king, is going into exile. It's not been announced where he's heading. He says he's done so to protect the monarchy from scandal, but his decision has outraged many Spaniards. This is really bad. He should pay the money back. It's a hasty decision. He should stay and defend himself in court like the rest of us. Prosecutors have long been investigating Juan Carlos. The monarch is facing accusations he took a kickback from Saudi Arabia when Spanish companies won a contract to build a railway between Mecca and Medina there. The king's former lover, Kronitzerzoon Wittgenstein, is suspected to have received the bribe money. Spanish journalists were given leaked tapes where she admits helping to hide the sum. The king made a fortune, especially in the United Arab Emirates and the Gulf states, and also Saudi Arabia. He accepted gifts and donations, and then he set up an elaborate financial structure to conceal that money. Spanish Republicans have been capitalising on the royal scandal by organising protests against the royal family. They're hoping Spaniards have had enough. The corruption doesn't just involve a few bad apples. We're demonstrating against the monarchy as a corrupt system. Juan Carlos allegedly continued to finance a lavish lifestyle with the laundered money after he abdicated the throne. He could still face charges over the matter, but now he's put a literal distance between himself and son King Felipe, and between himself and prosecutors.
For the very latest, we're joined by correspondent Jaime Velasquez. Good day to you, Jaime. Can you tell us why the former monarch has made, apparently, such a dramatic decision?
Well, we know that this decision was taken together with his son, the head of the state, Felipe VI, and also with the Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, and this decision was taken actually mid-July. It was a move in order to try to save the institution as a whole because of the scandals regarding the private life of Juan Carlos I. We know that he left the country already on Sunday, but we don't know exactly about his whereabouts. The press, Spanish press, is reporting that he might be at the moment in the Dominican Republic.
Has there been any confirmation of that he's gone to the Dominican Republic, and why would he choose that location?
Yeah, not an official confirmation yet. This is something that the Spanish press is reporting. Also, for example, the Portuguese press is saying that he might relocate finally in Estoril in Portugal. But right now, what we are seeing in the press here in Spain is that he might have gone to the Dominican Republic. He would stay, he would be hosted by the Fanjul family, as a strong, prominent family with interest in sugarcane, and also they have some hospitality complexes, and he would stay, according to these reports, in a complex in the Dominican Republic, at least temporarily. We don't know if he will stay there for long or not, but as I said, there's not any official confirmation regarding his whereabouts.
Following the end of the Franco regime, especially in the early 80s, Juan Carlos was a unifying figure for the country. What does this development mean for the royal family and its role in Spain?
Yeah, definitely. Juan Carlos Primero was one of the most prominent figures in Spain and was able to glue together this divided Spain. But Spain is becoming more and more polarized in the coming years, and also the figure of Juan Carlos Primero has been questioned lately stronger than ever, especially because of those scandals and allegations regarding the corruption. Felipe VI is trying to get as much distance as he can from the figure of his father, and the Spanish people, of course, is divided regarding that legacy that Juan Carlos Primero has, the role that he played in the arrival of the democracy here in Spain. Spain is divided even inside of the government. The Podemos party, which is part of the coalition government, has already requested that we should, look about our system. But the Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says it's not time for an institutional crisis. We are already in a health and economic crisis here in Spain.
That sounds like some good advice from the Prime Minister. Jaime Velasquez, thanks so very much for that today.
Thank you.
Factory explosions before, and they do happen. That would not have caused, according to some, this degree of damage. Damage that is visible several kilometers away from where the blast happened. The windows of buildings blown out a number of kilometers away, and I think there was no one in Beirut that didn't feel that explosion. So clearly an absolutely enormous explosion. The health ministry in Lebanon now saying that there is a very high number of injuries and extensive damage. The health minister being interviewed by the Lebanese television channel LBC, giving that information that there is a high number of injuries and extensive damage from that explosion in Beirut. We did receive reports and we did receive word on social media as well that perhaps there was more than one explosion. We can't verify that, but what we can say is that the area around Beirut port and from far beyond there as well has been severely damaged by that blast. And some local TV stations, as I said, have been putting out that theory once again that there in the port there were fireworks being stored. But again, fireworks, I think in very few people's minds would be capable of causing damage on this scale. An extraordinary scene for those of us who know Beirut well. This is an extremely shocking scene. It's very difficult to believe this is the heart of a major capital, perhaps the most cosmopolitan capital in the Arab world. And as you can see, it is a scene of total chaos, debris everywhere, and clearly people in a great sense of shock at what has happened to their city, and at a time when the country is going through major economic and political upheaval. Again, I'm just receiving word from the health minister, Hamad Hassan, saying that a high number of injuries, extensive damage have been caused by that explosion, or indeed those explosions, if there was more than one, in the port area of central Beirut. These scenes basically telling the story for us. You can see soldiers running in all directions, the windows of cars blown out, the windows of buildings blown out, debris everywhere. We saw earlier cars that had been turned upside down a very good distance away from where the explosion happened. I would say even a matter of a kilometer or two away from where that explosion happened. Cars turned upside down. That gives you an idea of the magnitude of that blast, which shook Beirut just about an hour or so ago, causing, as you can see, absolute confusion and extremely extensive damage. We'll try to get you live reports from the scene, but as you can imagine, telephone connections, internet connections have been massively disrupted by what's happened there. So contacting our correspondents on the ground, no easy task. As you can see, plumes of smoke right up into the sky above the port of Beirut. There are ambulances obviously getting onto the scene. That ties in with what the health ministry is saying. Large numbers of people injured, as it's evident given something on that scale. We've seen people covered in blood, people emerging from the rubble of buildings where they were in, windows blown out of office blocks, apartment blocks, cars turned upside down. It's clear that this is something that has not been seen in the Lebanese capital for many decades, an enormous explosion that has caused damage at a very wide radius. We don't yet have any numbers for you with regard to how many people have been injured, but what is clear is that for a very wide area there has been massive damage to buildings, massive damage to offices, and power is out for much of the city anyway. Even before this explosion, there were power cuts of about 20 hours a day or more in some parts of Beirut, meaning that connecting with the outside world is not altogether easy. and therefore we do not have at this particular moment anyone able to speak to us. But as you can see, the soldiers are on the ground trying to bring some order to the area and also trying to seal it off, because people were going freely to and from that area, and there is potentially the risk of a further blast given the scale of what has happened there. And of course the soldiers doing their best to make sense of an extremely complicated situation that they're in. That is the latest we have for you from Beirut. Large numbers of injuries, large numbers of casualties expected. No numbers for you yet. All we have are these shocking images from the heart of a thriving Middle Eastern capital, the city of Beirut, which has been turned to a scene of total chaos in the last hour by an explosion. Some say more than one explosion, which happened in the port area, which, for those of you who know the Lebanese capital, is very close to the center. And there you can see crowds standing in disbelief on the sides of the road in Beirut as emergency vehicles make their way to and from the scene of that explosion. And if indeed it caused damage to people a number of kilometers away and to buildings a number of kilometers away, one can only assume that the area affected in a very serious way by that explosion is going to be large, and the extent of the damage is going to be extraordinarily shocking. Huge plumes of smoke going up into the air. That is the scene in Beirut at the moment, with soldiers on the ground, emergency services going to and fro as people try to make sense of what has happened to the Lebanese capital in the last hour or so. We first received reports just after 5 p.m. Paris time, just over an hour ago, that a huge explosion had shaken Beirut. We saw witness videos posted on social media showing the office, for example, of the Daily Star newspaper, which is not particularly near to where that explosion happened, and yet all their windows were blown in. France 24 has a team of correspondents in Lebanon. We're not able to reach any of them at the moment, but one has told me in a WhatsApp message that explosion was larger than the one in 2005, which killed the then Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri. And we also have heard from people on the ground that this is something that has not been seen since the time of the civil war, this degree of chaos, which comes at a time, in any case, when the country is in the grip of social, political and economic turmoil. We're trying to get hold of our correspondent on the ground, but her building was severely affected, as indeed many other people's buildings have been. On social media, she's reported scenes of people covered in glass emerging from her apartment block, windows blown in, and from what I can understand, not even particularly close to where that blast happened. But you can just see the scale of it there. The cars, that were parked within several kilometers of that, a number of kilometers I should say, of that explosion have been very severely damaged. Let's cross to Beirut and we can speak to one of our correspondents there, Charbel Aboud, who joins us now. Charbel, just could you start by telling us where you are in relation to that explosion and what you felt?
I was around 10 kilometers far from Beirut in the region of Ba'abda. Then we heard a big explosion. It's similar to the explosion that rocked Beirut in 2005 at the 14th of February when they assassinated the former Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri. The explosion was huge, extremely huge, and we saw people going out from their buildings, checking their cars. It was a huge explosion. It was heard all over Beirut and far away from Beirut. I'm talking about some areas like Chouf, like Betten, and like Jouni. These areas far around 20 to 25 kilometers or more maybe from Beirut. They heard well the explosion. Many buildings, there's huge damage in many buildings surrounding the port of Beirut, where the explosion happened around 6:10 Beirut local time. We have till now, we don't have any clear number about the casualties, but the Red Cross is deployed in the area, and they are working on taking the casualties to the hospitals all over the country and in the surrounding area of the explosion. I want to say also that the seaport is located in the eastern part of the Lebanese capital, and it's surrounded by many buildings, many urban areas where you can find hundreds of people working and maybe having some shopping, some coffee shops, and in some area around this explosion.
And Sharbel, let's just go back to the scene of that explosion, because we're looking at scenes of it. We're looking at the scene now. I mean, what's significant about the port area? Is it a principally commercial port, or am I right in thinking that could also be some naval activity in that area? I'm sorry to put you on the spot like this, but do you happen to know what happens in that port area typically?
Actually, it's a big commercial port. It's the main commercial port of the country. In Lebanon, there's two big seaports, one in Beirut and one in Tripoli at the northern part of Lebanon. But in Beirut, this is the huge port, which is a commercial port. So normally, it's for commercial purpose, and it's only the only port in Beirut on the Mediterranean coast. Lebanon has two seaports, the major ones, one in Beirut and the other one in Tripoli. This one is in Beirut. It's located in the eastern part of the city. It's a big seaport known for transit work from Beirut to other Arab countries, and normally it's for commercial exportation and importation.
And Sharbel, just lastly, before I let you go, have you heard anything? Are you hearing any theories circulating, anything on local media, on social media, as to just why that area may have been targeted?
Till now, all what we know that it's due to fireworks, which is a big container containing a huge number of fireworks for normally used in Lebanon for parties or something similar, and there was a big fire on that container. So as a result of this, a big explosion happened. This is what many sources told us and mentioned on the local media. We are still waiting for more investigations in order to know what really happened there and who's responsible for this.
Okay, well, thank you so much for speaking to us. Sharbel Aboud, just outside Beirut.
Information from our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen. He has said, you might have heard this a few minutes ago, some local reports have suggested that the explosion was an accident at a fireworks storage warehouse. But Jeremy goes on to say that with tensions high on the southern border of the country with Israel, many other scenarios are being discussed on social media. So clearly there is one theory out there that this might have been an industrial accident in what several of our guests have described as an industrial area of Beirut, a warehouse in a port. But clearly Jeremy Bowen, our Middle East editor, has put this into the wider context of Lebanon, and we know from speaking to others that every time there is an explosion in Lebanon, in Beirut, people's minds go back to all the previous rounds of explosions they have heard. Someone who knows the country very well is Sebastian Usher, the BBC's Middle East analyst. He's on the line with me now. Sebastian, your thoughts?
Yes, well, I mean, it's something where you immediately think of what the cause is. I mean, you look at Beirut, you look at Lebanon, you think the key thing is the cause. When you look at the pictures, when you hear the testimony, when you see the damage, when you hear from people who are kilometers away and their windows have been destroyed, and you know, offices have even inside are completely turned over, and it looks like a war zone, then you just have to think that in itself, whatever the cause of this was, this is just a huge major incident that has hit Beirut. And as you were saying in that introduction, you know, obviously it's a city that has experienced this so often in the past. And I mean, you talk about experience. I mean, when a blast like this happens in Beirut, obviously it reminds you of many, but there's one obviously in particular, and perhaps other people have mentioned this already, but you're thinking of this week, is the huge explosion which actually happened in the heart of Beirut, in the center. This one happened away from that, perhaps fortuitously, but that was the assassination of Rafiq Hariri back in 2005. Now, this week on Friday sees the verdict being given in the trial of those who've been accused of involvement in his murder linked to Hezbollah. So there's been more tensions have been growing over that. Obviously, this will remind.
انفجار. كتر خير الله، الحمد لله. شوف القرية كان انفجار، ما تتخيل انفجار. هو من فرقاع.
لك يا سيد عامر البور ماشي عبارة عن كسر حديد، كسر حديد البور ماشي، كسر حديد البور. جتت بالأرض بالملايين بتشيل جتت، قد ما بدك بتشيل جتت. ثاني ما
كم جثة فيه؟
خير الله، ما حدا من بيحصيهم جتت الله.
مبنى إهراءات الأمن دمر معظمه.
الو بدي عدي لا بعدي عدي بس عدي